Hello, I'm Seth, aka Americanski, and welcome to PS Treks. In this ongoing retrospective series, we'll be looking back at the games, gear, and overall culture of my favorite retro era of gaming, the 5th generation. More specifically, the original PlayStation era. In this first installment, our debut episode, our launch title, you might say, we'll be looking at, not a launch title, but a great and fairly popular game from 1999 that launched a series that later became synonymous with classic PlayStation, Syphon Filter. Developed by Eidetic, published by 989 Studios. This fun spy action title follows U.S. agent Gabe Logan, his partner Lee and Zhang, all the shady government machinations that surround them as they attempt to stop an ongoing series of terrorist attacks that all become connected to a new advanced biological weapon known only as Syphon Filter. But before we get any deeper into the game, let's start where we always do, or well, in every episode of PS Treks, with the commercial.
Syphon Filter.
As you can see, this cool little ad from the time shows this very serious young business fellow on a lonely nighttime commute home, continually visualizing and imposing the sights and sounds of Syphon Filter atop everyday sights he sees along his way, along with the tagline, "It stays with you." Well, it just very well may, as this game and the series that followed ended up becoming a major name in fun, cinematic action with mature story on the original PlayStation. Now, looking at this game, you might surmise that it was made in the wake of Metal Gear Solid's massive success from the previous year, but it was actually more inspired by the popularity of Rare's GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. Indeed, it was the spy setting and mechanics of GoldenEye that would serve as the initial seed of inspiration for the game's development, along with the title, Syphon Filter, which at first had no real meaning, and it was really just a name. In an interview with the game's eventual creative director, John Garvin, with PlayStation Blog, he describes the troubled early production of Syphon Filter. After all, Eidetic's only game they had produced for the PlayStation up to that point was Bubsy 3D, so trouble was afoot. Before Garvin came on board, not only was the game not coming along, but it was also based on a very different concept than what the final game ended up being. Early on, Syphon Filter was actually more science fiction than it was espionage action, with a plot that involved kidnapped scientists who were forced to build a time machine. Now, obviously the game changed a lot during development, with the game's difficult production causing the developers to, instead of trying to fulfill any kind of set creative vision, actually change what the game was as they went along to simply be able to finish it. But the game did make it in the end under Garvin's direction, and in February 1999 in North America, July 99 in Europe, and August 99 in Japan, Syphon Filter strafed onto store shelves. And actually, you know what, let's take a moment just to look at the different covers for the game. The North American and European box art is what I grew up with, and I never really analyzed it or looked too deeply at it before. I just kind of associated its general aesthetic with the visuals of the game. But really taking a look at it now, it's a bit of a mishmash. It's kind of a myriad of disparate images that don't really fit together very well. So we've got this rendering of our hero, Gabe Logan, up here on the right. Then you got a cityscape that starts behind him, stretches out towards the left, and meets this subway car that's over here. And then below that, along the entire frame, you have a separate image, a night vision point of view of Gabe Logan's, of him shooting down some enemies. You know, all kind of just put together. You get a big Syphon Filter logo up top, a little logo on the bottom. Hey, got yourself a stew right there. I actually like the Japanese box art better. It's got some similar design ideas, but much more focused and cohesive overall. But oddly enough, you know, the North American one, it's a bit of a mess, but it is still memorable. It's recognizable, and there's something about the visual flavor of it that does remind me of the game itself. It's like an abstract collage of the game that someone made in their sleep after binge playing through the whole game in one sitting. But such binging did occur, as Syphon Filter released to sales and critical reception that far exceeded the studio's expectations. Indeed, Eidetic and PlayStation had a surprise hit, and once again under Garvin's leadership, the sequel, Syphon Filter 2, went into production for release the following year. Now that we've gotten through the history of its production, how does Syphon Filter actually play today, nearly 20 years after its release? Well, in my opinion, quite well. The gameplay and plot of Syphon Filter sort of feels like a Mission Impossible movie. The writing is actually kind of progressive in how topical and occasionally dark it is, and the diversity of its cast is also somewhat ahead of its time. Syphon Filter, along with classics like Metal Gear Solid, are some of the games I think of when I consider the maturing of storytelling in video games that happened around this era. While it does take some great steps forward, it's a little dated today in some ways. While the story is pretty developed, it can be kind of awkwardly paced at times, and much of the voice cast is somewhat stilted.
I don't know.
Tell me, or I will kill you.
This was still pretty early in the development of cinematic stories in 3D gaming though, so it's easy to forgive. But the voice acting for the main man, Gabe Logan though, that's just as appealing as ever thanks to the unique voice talents of John Chacon.
Benton's? The same man who coordinated our botched raid in Costa Rica? The man who got Jenkins' entire team taken out? Where is Benton now?
Controlling old Jello Legs Gabe Logan is a bit of a learning curve to it. It was noted at the time that Logan kinda was a bit sluggish when he's pumping his big gams trying to get around the levels. But while we have better 3D movement solutions today, I think Syphon Filter has a pretty satisfying control setup for its time. Logan can move backward, forward, turn left and right with the D-pad. He can strafe left and right with the corresponding shoulder buttons. It's a little awkward at first, but once you get the hang of it, you can make Logan pretty maneuverable in either tight or wide spaces. The game overall has a darker and more muted color palette that actually lends itself well to the tone of the story. The levels themselves are very nice, with a good variety of cinematic locales like underground tunnels, after-hours museums, national monuments, and snowy enemy fortresses. And there's good thought given to the design of all these surroundings as well. There's a lot of things like destructibles strewn about all the levels, like bottles and glass cases and windows and balloons, all of which make for satisfying and exciting collateral damage during a firefight. The levels are also somewhat non-linear, comprised largely of open areas with a certain level and freedom of how they're approached. To draw a more modern comparison, Uncharted 4 has a similar structure, containing linear levels with each being home to open areas that can be creatively approached through a variety of methods. That means most levels can be beaten either through patient stealth or frantic shootouts. The shooting itself is also quite different. Besides a first-person aiming mechanic, most foes are dealt with through the lock-on aiming. Once locked on, you can shoot the enemy, but the effectiveness of your fire is dependent upon several factors like distance, time elapsed, and shooting position. You also face the same danger of being locked onto with an ever-increasing danger of fatal shots by the enemies as well. This all adds some context and strategy to how you approach firefights. Actually, it reminds me of the shooting from a later PlayStation release, Fear Effect. As the game goes on, this lock-on mechanic actually becomes less useful though, as the enemies become tougher and usually wear bulletproof gear that necessitate first-person view to perform headshots. Of course, with Syphon Filter, you can't talk about the shooting without talking about the fantastic arsenal of weapons at your disposal. It runs the gamut, from silenced pistols and shotguns to night vision sniper rifles and grenade launchers. Also, the automatic weapon, the caliber kind of increases as you go along to eventually be armor-piercing, but the real star of the show, the most memorable weapon in this game, or of probably the entire series, is the humble little Taser. Free from both ammo constraints and the Geneva Convention, this Taser can incapacitate your foe quickly, but if you keep pumping the volts through much longer than at all necessary, the electric charge will intensify to the point of igniting the hapless terrorist into a burst of flames. This is so over the top and cruel, but whenever you're playing, you'll always be a little bit tempted to ditch the bullets and instead just leave a charred path of corpses in your wake. Check out this fun little secret in the first level, movie theater mode. If you go on this hidden path through the alleys, you can find a movie theater that's playing, well, I guess it's Syphon Filter. Through using a code on the pause screen, you can enter this theater and actually view scenes from the entirety of the rest of the game, in case you want to spoil the whole thing for yourself without actually playing it. That's like Eidetic predicted the future of gaming culture. Upon completing Syphon Filter, you're left with a slightly rough but mostly very polished and very fun and satisfying journey with a cool story and engaging gameplay. Later titles in the series would refine and expand what this game established very well despite a myriad of production issues. And when it finally hit the scene, it was a huge hit that spawned a franchise and became a recognizable touchstone for PlayStation fans for years to come. And that's been Syphon Filter. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for the inaugural episode of PS Treks. Please press the like button to like this video. Please press the subscribe button to subscribe to the Geekiverse if you haven't already. Feel free to leave us some feedback in the comments section down below, and look forward to more PS Treks coming very soon. I'm Cap Americanski, and until next time, remember, keep living in your world, playing in theirs, and never ever underestimate the power of PlayStation.